service this evening. And we'll cue my songs up here in just a second when he gets everything. Hold on. Technology. There we are. First song this evening is number 129, Amazing Grace, 129. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious is that grace appeared, the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already found. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been left 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we know less things to sing God's praise than when we first begun. Father in heaven, we thank you for this day and the chance we've had to come together and to worship you and sing songs of praise to your name. Father, we thank you for the beautiful day you've given us, the changing of the seasons, how green and beautiful everything is. Father, we thank you for all the blessings you give us each and every day and provide for us. Father, we thank you for your Son Jesus that went to the cross willingly to die for our sins. Father, we pray that you would be with those that are sick that have been mentioned in our prayer list. Father, I pray that you would give them each the measure of health that they desire, if it be your will. Father, comfort those that have lost loved ones in a way that only you can. Father, I pray you be with Jim as he brings us our message tonight. And I pray you be with us as we worship you and learn more about your word. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. Next song is number 957. 957. This world is not my home. This world is not my home, I'm just passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what would I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. They're all expecting week number 940. 940. Mark. Song before the lesson be number 968. 968. Oh, they tell me of home far beyond the sky. Oh, they tell me of home far away. Oh, they tell me of home where no storm clouds rise. Oh, they tell me of an unclouded day. Oh, the land of cloudless day. Oh, sky. Oh, they tell me of home where no storm clouds rise. Oh, they tell me of an unclouded day. Oh, they tell me of home where my friends have gone. Oh, they tell me of home far away, where the tree of life eternal blue sheds its fragrance through the unclouded day. Oh, the land of cloudless day. Oh, the land of unclouded sky. Oh, they tell me of home where no storm clouds rise. Oh, they tell me of an unclouded day. Oh, they tell me that he smiles on his children there, and his smile drives their sorrows away. And they tell me that no tears ever come again in that lovely land of unclouded day. Oh, the land of cloudless day. Oh, the land of unclouded sky. Oh, they tell me of home where no storm clouds rise. Oh, they tell me of an unclouded day.
Good evening. It's good to see everyone here tonight. Glad you came back. And it's springy-ish day. At least it's really sunny, windy, but that's okay. At least it wasn't raining today. And so, beautiful day. And it'll be hot before we know it. A little bit better this week. And then we'll get to the really warm temperatures. I was talking this morning as I was remembering about the very first year that I was here in the graduating class. And I was telling some people that Gavin and Lawson, because the band always plays. And of course, I said, you used to be playing Pomp and Circumstance for over and over and over and over again. And I said, just hope it's not in the gym. Now, it is better now, at least. Now, 8 years ago, they didn't have the air conditioning in there. And so they had to have that graduation in the gym. And I said, be careful, because if it's in the gym, as soon as it's over, everybody rushes the court, kind of like you do in a basketball thing. And the band people is there. Of course, poor Gavin's going to have a big old tuba. And so he's going to be having to try to weave his way through. So hopefully we'll have good weather for graduation and be at the football field. But if not, we'll make do and make for good memories, I guess. Genesis 41. Go ahead and turn there. By the way, there are actually 2 lessons. I'm not going to charge you, but just for the one. So 2 lessons tonight. they're lessons that I should have had you before. So anyway, we've already covered lesson 1. We're in the end of lesson 2. So I found it on my file system in my computer, or the one in the cloud, and it was where it should have been. I just overlooked it somehow last week. And so I printed out 2 lessons, and we'll be into a different lesson next week. So, by the way, the reason they're renumbered, you're probably wondering that. I don't know. Well, when I did this, it was for a Bible class program, and so I did it quarterly. So the first quarter was the Genesis 1 through about, I think, 36, 37, and that was the first quarter of classes, the first 13 weeks. Then we went, because we was doing it chronological, so we went to Job. So Job was in the second quarter. So in each quarter, I numbered them 1 and so forth. So this is actually the start of what I did before, the third quarter. So this is lesson 1 and then lesson 2. So if that makes sense, good. If not, don't worry about it. We won't test on that. So we'll test on other stuff, but not this. So anyway, last week we talked about the dreams this is going to be Pharaoh's dream, but last week we talked about the dreams that the baker and the cupbearer had. And remember that Joseph in prison now, and remember he did nothing wrong. He was the one that fled from Potiphar's wife, and yet he was cast into prison. And yet he still made his way up and was doing fairly decent, I guess, as well as you could in prison. And he overhears, he sees that these 2 guys are really sad, and he kind of checks on them, see what's wrong. And they had worked for the king, Pharaoh, and one of them was the cupbearer, very responsible, and one was the baker. And, of course, they told him his dreams, and he was able to interpret them because God gave him that ability. And so he knew what the dreams meant. To the cupbearer, it was good news. He'd be restored in 3 days to his position. To the baker, it'd be bad news. He'd be hanged in 3 days. And so, all he asked the cupbearer was, when you get to your position again, tell Pharaoh about it. That's all he asked. And you can imagine what hope. I mean, here Joseph's lies. He was probably a late teenager when this began, when his brothers threw him down in the pit and then decided to sell him into slavery. He's taken to a foreign land, to Egypt, and he's a slave. No hope of ever being anything but a slave. And then things start looking a little bit good while he's with Potiphar's house, and he's given a position of somewhat authority. And then the incidents with Potiphar's wife. He's cast into prison. He works his way up again. And here God gives him this great vision where he can interpret these dreams. And surely he's thinking, God is going to allow me to come out of this. How great it is. God granted me these ability to interpret these dreams. And this cupbearer is going to go to Pharaoh. And, well, I should have used like a SpongeBob thing. Said 2 years later. 2 years later. Now, I don't know about you, but if someone told me, interpreted my dreams in 3 days, and then indeed it came true, I'd be telling everybody. But apparently the cupbearer, I don't know, he just didn't think to tell Pharaoh about it. And so day goes by, and you can see how it'd be easy to get discouraged if you're Joseph. Here he is, still in prison, and the cupbearer's with Pharaoh, and nothing has changed. So what happens after 2 years? It says in Genesis 41, verses 1 through 8, after 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. And behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump. And they fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly thin cows ate up the 7 attractive plump cows. And Pharaoh awoke. Well, that would kind of wake me up too if I saw that in a dream. And it says, and he fell asleep and dreamed a second time, and behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump full ears, and Pharaoh awoke. Once again, that would wake me up. And behold, it was a dream. So in the morning his spirit was troubled. And he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. I'll tell you why they couldn't interpret them, because people can't do that. that is a realm only God can do. Only God knows. And so basically they're here with these dreams, and nobody could tell Pharaoh what it meant. Now you could imagine this was kind of a troubling dream, because it's rather disturbing, the images that he was seeing with the plump cows. And, the good cows, those would make some good steaks. But then he sees these little thin, sickly cows, and the thin, sickly cows eat up the plump cows. And then the same thing on the ears of grain, and how they were plump, and then the ones that were blotted, they ate up, consumed the ones that were plump. And so he wants to know, that is a troubling thing. What does this mean? A lot of times we come across things in life, and we don't know what it means, and sometimes maybe we have an understanding better as we go through things, but a lot of times there's things that we may never know. Those are the things, the secret things that belong to God. But this dream was given to Pharaoh for a reason. And it was to finally, I think, deliver Joseph out of his bondage. And it was to also allow Pharaoh to know that there is a true God. And so that both things would be accomplished. Now, this is going to sound similar, but now, of course, obviously this predates by a rather long time, the dating of Daniel. But Daniel, a similar thing. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. Of course, I like Nebuchadnezzar. He was a shrewd man, and so he had a dream he didn't understand, and he wouldn't tell anybody what the dream was. He said, he understood that some people might lie and say, well, this is what it means, and not really know. So he said, if you can tell me what my dream was, then you probably can legitimately tell me what it was. So he said, wait a second, King Nebuchadnezzar, only God can do that. Well, that was true. And so in Daniel 2, 27, 28, as Daniel comes, Daniel answered the king and said, no wise men, enchanters, magicians, or astrologers can show to the king the mystery that the king has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head as you lay in bed are these. And of course, he tells them about the different kingdoms that would be coming. Of course, Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold in the Babylonian Empire. Then you had the Medo-Persian, and then you had the Grecian Empire, with dominated by Alexander the Great. Then his 4 different parts of generals, and then of course the terrible, terrifying Roman Empire. And it's during the Roman Empire, he says, part of the dream was that this was when the eternal kingdom would come, the church. And it would destroy all these during the time of these kingdoms. And so we see this. What a great prophecy. In fact, most people, Daniel was one of the greatest prophets, and yet people want to dismiss it because it's too troubling for many, because it legitimizes that God is who he says is, that the Bible is correct, that indeed these things were known by God a long time. And most of the critics, they try to say, well, that part of Daniel wasn't written when it says to have been written. But the truth of the matter is, all the evidence is exactly contrary to that, including the greatest of these is the fact that the Septuagint had these portions in it long before most of these events would ever take place. So God is able. And Daniel was right, no enchanters. And so Pharaoh was wasting his time with going to his wise men, going to his magicians and others. And by the way, these were, probably they were rather slick, I'd say. Remember when Moses came to totally different Pharaoh, different time. But when Moses came to the Pharaoh, he had these magicians that could make their rods turn into snake and other things as well. So they weren't impressed with some of these tricks. They thought that's what it was. But Moses' was no trick, as they would come to find out it was the hand of God himself. But anyway, who can tell this dream? Well, God sometimes put people in place. And sometimes even when we don't do our part, God really wants us to, probably as soon as we should. But God puts things in motion so that things will be right. Don't know how he does it, but he does. So to his purpose, he always accomplishes things that he wants. Jesus was sent to this earth to be crucified. And that's indeed what he wound up being. All these things were the way God intended. These kingdoms, we're told that these angels somehow, they worked their work, and indeed these kingdoms rose up just as Daniel said this dream meant. It's time to remember. The Pharaoh, I imagine he was rather miserable. And one of the closest people to the king, to the Pharaoh, would be the cupbearer before he would eat or drink anything. And, I imagine Pharaoh was like us. He'd get hungry several times during the day. He'd get thirsty several times during the day. So the cupbearer would see him just all distressed at various times. He'd know what it was he was distressed about, this troubling dream. And I guess it finally jogged the memory of the cupbearer. And so in verses 9 through 12 it says, Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my offenses today, when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. We dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. So finally the memory comes back to after 2 years. This reminds him, I was thinking about when I was in prison and you were mad at me, and this Hebrew slave, he was able to tell me what my dream was. Now, a lot of times people have doubts about things. I don't know how the cupbearer could have doubts about what Joseph was able to do. And indeed, when Joseph comes to Pharaoh, Pharaoh has no doubts at all about what he tells him this dreams mean. And indeed, we should take comfort in things like Daniel, that these prophecies were true. The fact that we have these eyewitnesses, and we can know that the Bible is true. The Bible has many promises, and some of them are that one day Jesus will come again. Oh, there's a lot of people that doubt that. Well, that can't be real. Some people even doubt, there couldn't be a hell. Surely God wouldn't have a hell if he's a loving God. And on the doubts go. Peter writes concerning this, how that, there'd be times when people would scoff at this. He says, knowing this, first of all, that scoffers will come in the last days. By the way, we see consistently last days are mentioned in the Acts 2 as he's quoting from Joel and other things, and basically it just refers to this Christian era. So there's been scoffers for a long time, ever since Jesus ascended back to the throne. But scoffers will come in the last days, scoffing. That's what scoffers do. Following their own sinful desires. They will say, where is the promise of his coming? For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all things are continuing as they were from the beginning of creation. They deliberately overlooked this fact that the heavens existed long ago, and the earth was formed out of water and through water by the word of God, and that by means of these the world that then existed was deluged with water and perished. Of course, we're talking about the flood. And, it's amazing because, there's a lot of evidences, scientific evidence that shows that there was indeed some type of flood event. A lot of mountaintops have sea-type life that are on them, that they found evidences of them, and what else could really explain that well. And then Peter goes on in verse 7 and says, But by the same word, the heavens and the earth that now exist are stored up for fire. You remember he told Noah that I won't destroy the earth by flood again. In fact, that's what a rainbow represents every time, that covenant, that promise that he made to man. It says, but before fire, being kept until the day of judgment and the destruction of the ungodly. But do not overlook this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one. Some people want to make too much specific or literal about this 1,000 years. It's just trying to say, to God, time is meaningless. We wait, and I know, although, to the parents and to the exchange kids, they realizing that year went by really fast. And I tell a lot of people that junior year is probably going to be your best year because, you think everything's going to slow. And that senior year, everything's just going to go just like that. It's going to go right through. And just think what it's like for the parents. It just flies by. And, of course, the memories are there, but it goes by quickly. And you think back, it seemed like forever ago. But to God, time is meaningless. He's eternal. So, 1,000 years is even nothing to him. And definitely a day is not. So, these scoffers, they don't understand that God is so patient. It says, in fact, the Lord is not slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and then the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved, and the earth and the works that are done on it will be exposed. What is God waiting for? And some might say, God wants you to just destroy the earth now. It's so wicked and all this. And yet, as wicked as we think it is, it's nothing like in the days of Noah. It's nothing like what apparently was Sodom and Gomorrah. And yet, we have wickedness, that's true, but God is patient. He wants as many people as can, or that will, come to repentance. So He allows things to play out. But one day, it'll be too late for repentance. One day, that day of the Lord will come, and everything we know will be dissolved with a fervent heat. As we go on in verse 14 of Genesis 41, it says, Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. Doesn't sound like a good place to be. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, fit to appear before a king, before Pharaoh, that's the way he would have looked in prison, he came in before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh. And I got to love this. Think about the humility here and the truth that's spoken here. It is not me, in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. I'm nothing special, Pharaoh. I don't have this ability, but God has given this. God is the one that's going to reveal it to you. And indeed, this was nothing that man could do. This is something that is miraculous of nature that only God can know. And so Joseph affirms that it's not in me, it's God that's going to reveal this to you. Indeed, God will give an answer. Now, God, He is patient, and yet God is eternal. God knows all things. And we see, when Paul was speaking before the people at Athens, and he see all these things, these religious things, and they had one to the tribute to the unknown God. And then he begins to make a speech, and he says in verse 24 of Acts 17, the God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, or is He served by human hands as though He needed anything, since He Himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And He made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling places, that they should seek God, in hope that they might feel their way toward Him and find Him. Yet He is not actually far from each one of us. In Him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own points have said, for we are indeed His offspring. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now He commands all people everywhere to live. Now, these people were superstitious. They had all kinds of gods, these false gods. The Egyptians, too, had all these false gods. And yet, the fact that Joseph says, wait a second, it's not in me. In fact, it's not in any man. This is something only the one true God can do. And indeed, they would be believers in who God is. I want you to think about what Joseph has been through. He was a young man, likely a teenager of some sort, probably an older teenager. And he was so, can you imagine the rejection it must have been to be cast into a pit and then sold into slavery by young brothers? And then to be taken to a land really far away from where Israel was, or from where they were living at the time, and he would be taken there, and he would serve under Potiphar in his house. And it turned out, it looked like life was going good, as we said, and then, once again, the Potiphar wife incident. And then he goes from bad to even worse. He's now a slave in prison. I can't imagine how bad that is. You go from being a regular slave to having, some freedoms as far as going around the house, and now you're a slave in a prison. Then it's been even 2 years after he had told the cupbearer. When he comes to Pharaoh, he's able to tell him this dream. And indeed, God rewards him. In verse 37, it says, this proposal pleased Pharaoh and his servants as he tells them what it meant and what they must do, because it'd be 7 years of feast and 7 years of famine. And so it says, Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this, in whom this is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. Of course, once again, Joseph said it's the God that done it, but Joseph was a really good and outstanding individual. It says, you shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck, and he made him ride in his second chariot. They called out before him, bow the knee. Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. So he went from being a slave to then he'd be worse than a slave in prison. So he tells Pharaoh that, we need to do something because we're going to have 7 years of feast, but then we're going to have famine, so we need to build storehouses. We need to put this in so we're not starving when this famine comes. Pharaoh liked that. And he said, well, wait a second. Who else can implement this besides you? One who has the Spirit of God. Now, I want to tell you, be that type of person when you go out and when you're on a job, when you're in college, when you're at school, when you're wherever you may be. Be the type of person that people say, there's something different about that person. Whether or not you're necessarily the most talented, be the person who's always dependable. Be the person who's always on time. Be the person who always does the right thing. And you'll stand out. I find it interesting. We went and visited one individual yesterday that's a exchange student from Brazil. And he's living the high life in a big farm. Or it's not a huge farm, but it's a farm in Stillwell, Oklahoma. And he loves it. He gets to work on tractors and rebuild things. He gets to, work in the fields. He gets to work with animals. And he's just having the time of his life. Each their own. But one thing that set him apart in school in his ag program is he will come in and work extra hours. He will come in and stay forever on the things. He works hard. And I don't know what this young man will be, but he will do well in life. He wants to eventually come back to the U.S., but he will do well because he is willing to work hard. There's something about that. A lot of people like to goof off. A lot of people don't like to really work hard. But as a Christian, we should. Because everything we do, we're doing it as for God. And that's what Joseph was like. Yes, indeed, he interpreted the dream, but he had excelled in every capacity he'd ever been. Even if you remember what really made the brothers mad, yes, he told about his dreams, but what really made him mad was he told his father how they were goofing off, if you remember. And so indeed, Joseph is finally rewarded. If we work hard as Christians, we talked this morning about work because one day there'll be time to work no more. God will reward us too for doing what's right. Even if we're downtrodden, even if things don't go our way all the time, even if we have hardship, keep on keeping on. Shortly after the incident of the rich young ruler come to Jesus, and of course he'd done so many things right. In fact, people from the outside would look at him and say, oh, that's a great young man, a great godly man. But remember, he kept asking, he said to Jesus, what yet do I lack? Jesus said, sell all that you have, give to the poor. And went away in sorrow. We had many possessions, and he loved them more than choosing all of them. Possessions are temporary. We can never put that in front of God. And so, the disciples, they said, well, wait a second, well, who then can go to heaven? Because he said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to go to heaven. He said, well, who then can go to He said, well, God, all things are possible. And then Peter said, we've left all to follow you. And then Jesus says, truly I say to you, there is no one who has left house or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or lands for my sake and for the gospel, who will not receive 100-fold now this time, houses and brothers and sisters and mothers and children and lands with persecutions and the age to come eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and the last first. Sometimes being a Christian, you don't always get the rewards that maybe others do. People that lie, cheat, steal may go up the ladder quicker than you. They may have more money than you. They may have bigger houses, better cars, or whatever. Being a Christian, sometimes you're going to be ridiculed. Sometimes you're going to be, people are going to make fun of you. You're going to say things about you. Maybe people will just think of you as a religious zealot of some kind and look down upon you. That's okay. I dare say that there's no one here today that can't say they've been blessed. And it may not even necessarily be in some type of monetary value, but I dare say we have a lot. A lot of times I'm almost amused that you see these surveys always taken where, we've reached the point where a lot of people say, will tomorrow's generation have things better off than today's generation? And for the longest time in the U.S., it always was, yes, it'll be even brighter and better as far as prosperity goes. And yet now, that's not the way people say. What's interesting about it, it's not based on real facts as far as how you're doing or how people are doing. I guarantee you went to, it doesn't matter what age you are, you went to your grandparents, your great-grandparents, asked them what it's like when they were young. Ask them what kind of leisure activities they had. Ask them what kind of electronic devices they had. Ask them what kind of cars they had, what kind of TVs they had. Oh, maybe you missed it. When I was young, I was the TV remote. Parents say, "Go turn the channel," and sometimes you had to wiggle the rabbit ears or something like that. But you were the remote, and it worked good, But it's so much nicer. Didn't have phones, cell phones. I didn't even have a phone in my house. I remember when I was young. I'm old, but I'm not that old. Some of you, we could go on. We could say some of you may not even have had, well, let's just say, indoor plumbing, I guess, would be the easiest way to express it. That really wasn't that long ago, was it? And so, we have so many more things now. Now, we've become a creature of wanting more and more, but God has blessed us, yes, prosperity-wise, but I want to tell you beyond that, I think each and every one of us have people who love you. You have family, you have friends, you have shelter, somewhere to stay, you have a way to get around, you have all kinds of things, you have food. Most of us have too much food. God has blessed us in this time. But it pales in comparison to what's to come. We'll persevere like Joseph did. We may have times when things are hard, things are difficult, but I want to tell you, if we keep on keeping on, one day, God will reward us. I don't know where you stand tonight. If you're not a Christian, why not become one? Because that's the only way you will ever receive the truly eternal reward, the great reward from God Himself. If you're not a Christian, why not become one tonight? Jesus simply said, "He who believes and is baptized will be saved." It's that simple. Maybe you're here and you went a different way. Maybe you've gotten frustrated and maybe you went a different path than you should. Maybe you need to make something right tonight, or maybe just need prayers of the church. Whatever the need may be, come now and go to stand and sit.
I am the way, I am lying all the way. Come for me, love is the only a step only a step from where you